Well, I'm a pretty hardcore bachelor, and I am also a recluse. And as the years have been going on, I become progressively more of a loner. And I find that I am my own best company. But when you spend a time alone, you tend to develop idiosyncrasies. And some of those idiosyncrasies are not exactly socially acceptable. I rarely ever eat out, and it's even more rare that I eat out with someone else. But some of my friends are in the same boat. And I can remember an occasion when I ate out with a friend who is of the same feather. And when the salad came, the friend chewed with the mouth open and liberally spattered the table with spots of green. And when the soup came, the friend slurped the food so loudly that you could hear it across the room. And this discombobulated me so much that I dropped a whole handful of mashed potatoes. That's obviously a joke, but it's not without purpose. And the purpose is more than to just relax everyone. The purpose is to change the tone a little bit. These talks have been complicated, they've been far-ranging, and they've almost been doctrinaire. In the language of that tone, we would describe them in the tone that we want now as highfalutin. So now we want to get down to the nitty-gritty, and we want to get down to practical things. In the Rosicrucian philosophy, the practical application of looking back is retrospection. Retrospection is the most important spiritual exercise for Rosicrucian aspirants. It might be the best tool of any for soul growth and spiritual self-development. First, a very simple description. Then we can work into the subject more. Now, a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight is going to be from personal experience. But that does not mean I want to give the impression that I am good at retrospection, because I am not. I am not happy with my proficiency at retrospection. I can say that I've improved, but that might not be saying very much, because saying where I started from. I've talked to many Rosicrucian aspirants over the years, all over in the Western Hemisphere, and I have yet to find a single one that is satisfied with the performance of retrospection. So in that regard, it is a success in that it humbles us. Retrospection is performed at the end of one's day when one is about ready to retire. One puts oneself into repose in a relaxed and restful position. Then the exercise is that one recalls the events of the day in reverse order. And in recalling them, one pays special attention to the events of moral significance, the events that are most likely to be charged with feeling, and in which one is likely to have attitude, strong attitude, whether good or bad. And then one tries to neutralize the effects of those deeds by re-experiencing them. And re-experiencing them with a reversed perspective. That is how the world saw them from without rather than as you saw them from within. Now that's all there is to the retrospection. Very simple. You can, almost anybody can follow the directions. You can take it to great depths. You can try to see each little thing in each little event, but that's pretty advanced. It's simple, but it's also factual. What happened, happened. And that can't be denied. And facing reality is what it's all about. The big thing that comes up is that for an exercise that appears to be so simple, why is it so difficult to perform? So the first thing we want to discuss is actually doing it. I've had a lot of conversations with a lot of people, and I've learned that most people give up on doing the exercise. In fact, most aspirants have actually given up on believing they can have first-hand knowledge, which is a real pity. Because if I read the CosmoConception and the writings of Max Heindel, anybody should be able to make themselves ready for first-hand experience. Some people give up on retrospection a few months after encountering the Rosicrucian philosophy. There's that first blush of excitement about it, and then it wears off. Most people that encounter the philosophy do stick with it, and they apply it to their lives, but not the retrospection. Obviously, we can't benefit from what we don't do. That's an important, simple thing. Now, we could go into the alibis and the excuses, which to some degree are lies, that we give to ourselves for not doing it. But, it's sort of like a sophistry to look at the excuses and alibis instead of just confronting the issue. Now, in one of the earlier talks, in these evening talks, we discussed the law of action. Formally, it is called the principle of action, and it acts like action and reaction in physics. And Max Heindel called it the principle of cause and consequence. And the consequence is a good choice of words, because it means that we have consequences within all of the things that we do. A reaction, in this sense, is right within the action itself. Now, when we think of causes, we usually think of ephemeral things, like who caused the accident, things like that. Rarely do we think of people who espouse great causes, like feeding the poor or something like that. When we do see those grand causes, they evoke a reaction. And since retrospection is all about attaining to spiritual consciousness, it's a grand cause, and it provokes a reaction. So we should logically expect a reaction to our cause. With retrospection, the reaction is what psychologists call psychological resistance. In overcoming resistance, internal and external, but especially internal, we build what Max Heindel called moral muscle. And when speaking of people who are dreamers instead of doers, he said they have wishbone where they shouldn't have backbone. He had some very clever things to say. Now, there's no doubt about it. It's mandatory to overcome resistance if we want to accomplish soul growth. If we can't get beyond the resistance, we can't expect to improve and take strides spiritually. So, let's begin talking a little bit about resistance. St. Paul said something to the effect that the good that I would, I do not do, but that which I would not, that do I. And we can take hope, because if we read him later, he says, I have overcome. No matter what my state, I am content. This is from a man who was left stoned and who almost drowned to death in a sea mishap. The most usual form of resistance is falling asleep. That's not surprising. In fact, it's actually what we should expect as resistance to waking consciousness. If you're not awake, you're asleep, or you're unconscious, and so that's the natural expected resistance. With the tendency to fall asleep is quite strong. I had a friend once that did retrospection standing in a shower with the water running, and he still nodded off. That's really something. Now, there appear to be two reasons for resistance. The second one, it's going to take us a long while to get to it. The first one is based on natural principle. That is why we had these early talks. In the first talk in this series, we said there is a disincarnating effect to looking back. It's sort of like a little death. We look back and we are taken away from this world. So, the disincarnating effect of looking back in retrospection is to fall asleep. If we don't, it takes us out of our body. And if we don't have enough soul material in our etheric body, or if we don't know how to transfer our attention to the etheric body, there's no choice. You fall asleep. Also, in those early talks in this series, we noted that looking back from consequence to cause enabled us to see events in total. If you experience something from cause to consequence and then from consequence to cause, you have the total event. And when that happens, in terms of action and reaction, you have neutralized something. And if you are the neutralizing agent in that, your attention that draws cause and consequence to each other draws out, or it extracts the soul material. Every rose has its thorn, so the very thing that makes retrospection valuable, the thing that is the ability to draw something out, has the trial of falling to sleep built right into it. Now, these days, in myself, I do something that some might consider cheating. Sometimes now I will go to bed as much as 2 hours before sleep time. And the cheating part is I will sit up to do retrospection. After falling asleep too many times, I came to the indubitable conclusion that retrospection is more valuable than I would do in those 2 hours. And I have no guilt about sitting up because the benefits outweigh the alternative of falling to sleep. Once in a while, I do return to doing it lying down, and I can get all the way through a retrospection. And someday in the future, I'll do that all the time. But for right now, I don't want to take a chance on not remaining awake. Now, the other reason for falling asleep or missing important memories is much more subtle and much more difficult. It is what is called psychological resistance. But we, as spiritual students, see it as something more. We often do not fall asleep in retrospection because we're tired, but more because we do not want to face some things that we have done. It would be better said that there is something within us that does not want to face what has been done. As spiritual aspirants, we want to expand and deepen our consciousness. That is a natural, undeniable spiritual drive. Once you have awakened any kind of thought of getting better, especially spiritually, you can't put that to sleep. Now, we intuitively know when we become aspirants that there's something more, something divine within our being. We sense that there is greatness in us, that there is divinity in us. There are moments when things come out of us or things dawn on us that'll leave us slack-jawed. We are awed by what happens. And when that happens, it's usually also an experience in humility. It doesn't take long, if we are earnest in our seeking, before we also realize that there is something in us which is not so nice. In fact, if we look at it, we have things in us that are reprehensible. And we can't kid ourselves, but that we're capable of being nasty. We like to tell ourselves, and we even like to tell other people, that we really are nice people. On the surface, that may be so, but simple reason tells us if we were really nice people, we would be allowed to use the healing panacea, which is an experience that would leave anyone in tears. Or we would be initiated, but we're not. So obviously we cannot be trusted with something that is spiritually valuable. We might have anger, and if we get angry, we could kill somebody with that same force. Christ, the elder brothers, and the divine hierarchies are all pulling for us. They need help, and they love to see us have success. But they can't do anything if we're not trustworthy. Now, this doesn't mean that we are horrible, malignant monsters of evil. That's not true either, because we do good things, and we do work on doing more of that. It just means for certain that we don't know ourselves thoroughly. We suspect that there's something divine in us, and we suspect that there's something malignant in us, but we just don't really know. And that takes us back to what we said in an earlier talk, Gnothi se auton, know thyself. And that's what this is all about. So we don't know the good that we're capable of, and we don't know the evil that we gloss over. This is what it means to expand and deepen our consciousness, to see things about ourselves and to see things about the world. And we can't really see things in the world unless we have a clear looking glass to look through. And that means that we are our instrument of observation, and it is we who need to be cleaned or cleared. We need to get beyond the surface. So, there is this something in us that resists reformation. It is an inner adversary. And Max Heindel called this inner adversary the animal soul. It has changed its purpose in our human evolution as we have changed. At first it was meant to be our protector. This was necessary because in what is called the fall of humanity, we took the creative power into our own hands. And we did what we wanted to do when we wanted to do it. We thought we were obtaining immortality, and we probably shall, but not quite the way that we thought we were doing it. But once we take the creative power in our own hands, that is a declaration of divinity. And if there is anything about a truly divine being, it respects every other divine being. So neither the angels or the other spirits that guided us or even the Almighty would dare override our declaration of divinity. Once we take this creative act in hand, we are the arbiters of our own destiny. Nobody's going to overpower us. It's up to us. That's respect. You respect somebody enough to make their own mistakes without having to meddle in their business when they don't want you. So what happened is we needed some way to take care of ourselves because we were not wise yet. We were stupid enough to fall for the temptation to do this. We were probably not smart enough to take care of ourselves. We were sort of like innocents. We sort of be like an animal without any inner guidance for that animal. What would it do? This is what happens, sometimes they take animals that have been tamed and then they try to put them out in the wild and they can't take care of themselves. They perish very quickly. So what happened is that the divine hierarchies helped us to focus an image or a quality like our selfhood, which is that divine idea that we talked about in an earlier talk. It focused the essence of that into the desire body, but only in the desire body of those who had stratified their desire body by being able through experience to recognition the difference between good and evil. This is what that little snippet in the Bible says. You will be able to eat of the fruit of the knowledge of good and evil. And it's knowledge. It isn't wisdom and it isn't direct revelation or anything like that. So when we had experienced enough of the difference between right and wrong or good and evil, then we had a stratified view in our desire nature. And then the desire body is a reflective projection from the human spirit, from the self. And so a pseudo-self was reflected into the upper part of the desire body. And its purpose was to take care. It became something like an instinctual protector of our existence when we are here in the material world. And this lower nature, or animal soul, or whatever you want to call it, in the desire world coalesced with the mind. It didn't become really a thinking pseudo-being. It became something like a cunning kind of consciousness. And what happened is, over many millennia, as a consequence of the fall, and because we're looking forward again, we brought the whole cosmos, as far as we are concerned, deeper into matter. And the more materialistic we became, the more we became out of touch with our inner nature. Paul describes it in the first chapter of Romans very clearly. He says, at one time we could see through the very Godhead, but slowly by our perversions we were brought into this blindness. So we're blind to both the divine part of our being, and we are blind to this animal nature, this lower nature. And so we're basically pretty much unaware of them. And this is what psychologists call the unconscious. So we have this as part of our being and part of the way we see the world. And another thing happened over many millennia to this pseudo-self, or this false ego. The same beings that tempted us in the first place to rebel and to go against the injunction about using the creative force, those same beings purloined this being, or the pseudo-being, in the desire body. And so it was no longer just a protector. You could almost say that it set up shop for itself. This is quite there were times that I used to ride my bicycle back and forth to work, and I would go past where there was a bird that had baby birds in a nest, and that bird would dive at you and you had no protection. Something in the air, you don't have any protection against that at all, especially when you're trying to ride a bicycle. Then if you think that you're not conscious of something, and that which you are not conscious of can pull strings and cause you to do various things for its own end, that's even more a more powerful position than a bird diving down on you. So we have this inner adversary that we can't see. It can't think, but it comes to an instinctual sensing of things. And it knows our limitations and our strengths. And being in a desire body, it lives by desire. Therefore, the more unrestrained a desire is, and the more exciting a desire is, the more it loves it. And so, ever since then, right down to our own times, it brings us to commit what are called the first and second sins. The sins of Adam and the sins of Cain. That is, sex and violence. Now this is a worthy adversary. A worthy adversary that has an advantage of being unseen by most. Now, Max Heindel thought that even with intense application to completely overcome it, it would take about 4 rebirths before that was possible. He himself was an initiate, and he said that from time to time that he hid his hands in his face at the shame of some of his acts or some of his thoughts or things like that. We don't have any alternative, though. We can overcome it, and we must overcome it. It is our evolutionary duty. It's the only way we can serve and fulfill our purpose in the cosmos. So what does it mean to overcome it? Some schools think that is to obliterate it. Something that took millennia to develop, they want to obliterate. Others try to overpower it, and it's just like an obsession. If you try to overpower it, it just gets stronger. That doesn't work. So what do? As far as I understand it, since it's in the desire nature, it's like an animal. And what do? You tame an animal. And you tame an animal with love. If you can't respect your own internal adversary, you can't probably respect any other human. I think the idea is to have the inner adversary become a junior partner to the real self. That junior partner takes care of the mundane material things as it was intended to do in the first place, and the spirit gives itself to the more important things. It doesn't have to deal with the little ditties. We recognize we have this division within us. We fight with ourselves. We have an inner argument. But there's no reason that it can't be a conversation. The lower nature, because it is what it is, should be filled with questions. And the higher nature should give answers. So instead of arguing with ourselves, we should question and listen for an answer. I think that's a very healthy way of looking at things. Now, the next thing that we as sincere aspirants want to know is, how do we accomplish this? And the answer is to tame it the way we tame any other thing, with love, and with giving it positive reward. And positive reward is not giving it treating ourselves to some new special desire. Giving it positive reward is helping it to realize in ourself that we can do good things, and it feels good to do good things. And love is as strong or stronger as any other emotion. So it's excellent for taming. I've seen people with love be very gentle, very kind, and handle pretty monstrous situations. The Rosicrucian Fellowship suggests 2 other means to this taming. One is heartfelt, self-forgetting service. Every time we do a deed, and we do it from the goodness of our heart, we add more of the soul ethers to our vital bodies. And the richer that our vital bodies are, the easier it is for life spirit to project intuitions. And an intuition that comes from the life spirit bypasses the mind, and it bypasses the desire nature. And if we learn to listen to what the Bible calls the shepherd's voice, we act on it immediately. And this is an adjunct. It isn't a replacement for thinking and desiring. It is an adjunct to as a way of living to progress spiritually. So it doesn't have an argument. You can't argue with intuition. You try to, it disappears immediately. So, the lower nature then is deprived of a lot of things through which it would gain more strength, and it makes it easier to work with. The other way is more direct. Through retrospection, we discharge the desires, and we burn up the desire patterns and the desire forms and even the little entities that we have created in ourselves. It's disarming. So we free ourselves from negative desires, and we have a lot of them hanging in our aura. So we need to explore more aspects of retrospection so we can really do this work. When we are looking back in retrospection, we are using memory. We can't talk about memory as a whole because it is much too much for this talk and maybe a few others as well. So let's only look at some pertinent things about memory solely for the purpose of improving retrospection. There are different kinds of memory. I have a scar here from when I worked in the canning factory in my high school days, and the scar is a memory of an event. But that's not the kind of memory that we're looking for. There is brain memory, which is also what we're not looking for, but sometimes it helps because it has associative properties, and those are sometimes helpful for getting into the etheric memory. And the etheric memory is what we wanted. It is found at the negative pole of the atoms of the reflecting ether. We want this for a number of reasons. One is because it is complete and thorough. It contains things as if it were a movie, but it's even more than a movie. Everything is in that memory. Everything that was made manifest into this world. Our thoughts, when they become manifest here, our emotions, the general psychic atmosphere, and so on. And those images are, I don't know how to say it, they're stretchable. You can actually step into those memories in your consciousness and see things that go beyond your memory in the ethers themselves. Another reason we want this memory is because it isn't tainted. It isn't biased. It's just a recording. In our desire natures, we may be very biased, especially since we're trying to defend that defenseless ego, personal ego. So we want to have a view that is bias-free. Because, it's surprising the way people will remember things. They won't remember things at all the way they really were. People remember things the way they want them to be. Even without bias, it's difficult for most people to access this memory, even partially. One of the problems with accessing the etheric memory is when people are beginners like ourselves and we're trying to do this exercise, is how do we get at the etheric memory? And some people use the brain memory to do that. And they use associations to jog the memory. and then you get the image, you get the picture. I do that from time to time, but I'm not completely happy with that. Now, some spiritual teachers say that you should actually use your rationality and try to reconstruct the circumstances with your rationality as a means to gain access to the memory. I don't like that at all, because it's so indirect, and because when you start using your rationality, you're putting the emphasis on the positive pole of the reflecting ether and not the negative. The way I'm talking personally here, now, these are not be-all, end-all things. I could even be wrong in them, but the way I'm working with it these days is direct will. If somebody really wants to grow spiritually, they will find the will to call up the etheric pictures, even the hard ones. The ones that we fall asleep so that the lower nature would just as soon have us fall asleep and lose the prize that is the consciousness in the dense physical body, rather than lose its ability in the long run to control us through retrospection. I find that in the inner dialogue, the true self will make apparent what we need to see and what we need to do, and it will even offer encouragement, though sometimes the encouragement stings. Max Heindel tells us that in the retrospective part of initiation, the teacher says to the candidate, as he's going through this kind of super retrospection and initiation, he hurls at him, "If thou would be Christ, help thyself." Meaning to say, you don't want to be, if you want to walk into the inner worlds, into the kingdom of the gods, you can't be a baby anymore. You've got to face it. You've got to take will and do that. I have had circumstances, they're shameful, where the inner nature says, in effect, though not using words, if you really want to be pure, or if you really want to be a healer, you have to do this. The Spirit really doesn't coddle us if we're sincere. But that doesn't mean that our approach has to be harsh. It doesn't have to be macho. It is just as effective to approach retrospection as if one is opening one's soul and confessing to Christ. That works. Confess the events of your day, but I find that I can't always stay in that state of devotion. I can stay in it for a little while, but I can't hold it. It's possible to miss the forest for the trees. One can get so bound up in the technique of retrospection, especially in trying to see everything, that one gets psychologically tired out before having gotten very far. That's when a person falls asleep. And that's when that thing comes in, when the personal ego would rather take the body away and sleep than allow its position to be weakened. I have found minimal success in terms of moral improvement by asking the higher self to serve up what images I need to be cleared of. This is if I can't see everything in the whole day. It's sort of like, show me what I need to be shown. I found success in that. Again, that's something I can't always maintain. I'm not always in that receptive of a mood. It's hard to stay with sincerity and devotion through an entire retrospection. There's a sting when you realize your own inadequacy and the task is too much for you. And that's what you encounter when you try to do retrospection. Once we get started with it and see a little of spiritual reality, the Spirit won't let us fall asleep and won't let us fall back or go backwards. And it will spare no pains to prod us onward. You know, it's psychologically painful, especially if you're a proud person, and I have a lot of that in me. It's painful to realize that you're a spiritual sluggard. No matter what the world thinks of you, when it's between you and the divine within, you realize pretty quickly that you're not such hot stuff. You're a sluggard. Now, in retrospection, there are more reversals that are possible, other than the reversal of time. The reversal of perspective is important, and it is necessary to be effective. For instance, if we committed a sin of commission, wherein we have done something to someone, such as attacking them verbally, we have to feel that attack. We have to feel it very clearly. And just in the same way that a boat glides back when you try to step off of it onto shore because the reaction is going that other direction, the action propels forward and the reaction comes back. Except that the reaction that is in our sin of commission has in it all the qualities of what we did. We can feel ourselves as others feel us. And that's really quite remarkable. You have a really rich life when that's the case. You know, we're not just some pinpoint consciousness that doesn't see things. In order to resolve a moment, one has to feel and extract the essence of that moment. You have to re-experience the whole, including the reaction. It isn't always easy to do, especially again when we don't want to face ourselves. If we verbally accosted someone, we often feel justified. I told him a thing or two, or I put him in his place. And if we don't have the entire event, we don't really know if we were in the right. So when remembering, it's just as easy to re-justify yourself, and in that case, you're not doing yourself any good by retrospecting. You're actually grinding things in more. This is why the etheric memory is so important, because it is factual. And in it, one can experience the reverse perspective. In the grand retrospection that we call purgatory and first heaven, the reversing of the perspective is thorough. Just as when we said several nights ago, there's no tomorrow in that retrospection. It's thorough, it's deep, it penetrates. In life, we experience things from inside out. But in death, when we go through purgatory and first heaven, we experience things from outside in. Our consciousness is expanded to the extent of the macrocosmic desire world. I imagine you can get to that level with retrospection also, but I'm not anywhere near that. But we then see literally what the world sees and what we're putting into the world and what we don't want to put in and what we want to reinforce and put in more. Our assertions from our petty personalities are refelt. What we're talking about in the desire world when we are doing a thorough retrospection is re-feeling. That it's sort of like when you say you set something, you set a switch and then you reset it, it neutralizes it. That is the same kind of emotional thing that you're trying to do in retrospection. You're trying to re-feel. This reverse perspective in this way brings another benefit to us. It is awakening a more Christ-like experience. In the threefold spirit, the second attribute, the Christ attribute, is boundlessly other-oriented. We understand some of that other orientation in altruism. In St. John's Gospel, we find the reference of Christ saying, He carries out the will of the Father. There is an obedience that He wants to carry out the will of the Father. That is His duty. But if you look further in St. John's Gospel, the opposite direction is there also. Christ lays down His life for His friends. And He actually tells us, love thy neighbor as thyself. It's easy to do things from the perspective of your own self, but if your own self is everyone, or is altruistic, that's a different kind of view. That's a totally different perspective. Now, in working with retrospection, I find that the sins of omission are much more difficult. If we didn't see an opportunity in the moment, it's not likely that it's going to be easy to see it in review. You cannot react in action. And as far as I can see, it involves reviewing a total scene or a scenario to see what's missing. And that is what you get when you have that macrocosmic view. You can look at an episode of your life, like me with this talk, and you can ask the question, what didn't you do? And the answer to that is, if you look, you can see that there were all sorts of opportunities that you could have done something positive. But it takes that bigger perspective from looking from the outside. We have just a little bit left in time, so let's look at one other semi-important factor. And the factor lies in the fact that refeeling is feeling. If we don't feel, we probably won't be successful in discharging desire expressions or in extracting the soul material. In sincerity, in this kind of sincerity, it's very important. Self-honesty is important. Courage is important. Now, Max Heindel recommends something like rubbing salt into the wounds. I'm not so sure that that's a right way to proceed. And this is something I somewhat disagree. You know, like if you're chastising yourself or if you're punishing yourself, you're playing God. And that is not retrospecting. That's not cleaning things out. If we can, by the force of will, because we want to be pure people, if we can experience that memory, it's got everything in it anyway. If we refeel what is actually there, we don't have to rub any salt wounds in, salt into the wounds. It's just enough to realize what was really there. Now, in closing in this, I want to reiterate that I am not an authority on retrospection, and I'm not even a great retrospection respecter, but I have improved, and I value that improvement very highly. There have been 2 periods in my life that I have really earnestly worked at retrospection, and the changes in consciousness that I experienced in those 2 different periods have been extremely remarkable. There's no question to me about the efficacy of retrospection. And the only, when I look at it now in the course of this talk that we've just gone through, my general assessment of it is that I focus too much on the unpleasant things. And I apologize for that, because I don't want to do anything that would deter anyone from actually doing the retrospection. And I don't want to make it seem like it's a horrible experience, because the result of it in following days is that you really are a changed person. And that's as far as I was able to go. So let's close with the Rosicrucian student's prayer. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Any questions?
Well, I guess I've been using my brain. And, early on, I made the association, or I read that its main thrust is to get us to see where we made a mistake and where we also did the right thing. Mm-hmm. Okay. Sort of indifferently. And I agree with you. Now, at first, I would rub salt in the wound, but I was instructed that fighting something and pushing against it will fuel, sort of like a protest, an anti-war protest. Many times it was counterproductive. It fueled the other side. So, no, make peace with it. Make a friend of it, like you said. Hey, hello, friend. Fear, anger, come on in. I know you. Yeah. But aside from that, it's very good mental exercise. Now, here's where I'm probably making a mistake. Going over the minutiae, trivial things. Like before you go to bed, the grooming things that you'll do, like whether it's brushing teeth and what have you, and clearing things up and locking the doors. I see myself doing all that.
Yes, that's all right as long as it's in proportion.
Oh, okay.
Eventually we'll see everything, and we'll see things that we never believed were there. Max Heindel talks about an experiment that he tried with trying to see how unaware people were of the inner worlds. And he would go near somebody who was sitting next to a lamp, and he would take and materialize more and more and more as an impedition between the lamp and the person, and he was astounded that people
did. You pick up on it?
Yeah. Boy, I see that expression that is like a perpetual question, and that's not bad. Okay, I guess that's it. Thank you very much. It's been a very, very good summer school. I'm tired out, but sometimes when you're tired out from things, you feel good because it was worth getting tired out for. So.
Well, I managed to stay awake tonight.